A picture book of Martin Luther King Jr. Written by David A. Adler, illustrated by Robert Casilla. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of America's great leaders. He was a powerful speaker, and he spoke out against laws which kept black people out of many schools and jobs. He led protests and marches, demanding fair laws for all people. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin's father was a pastor. His mother had been a teacher. Martin had an older sister, Willie Christian, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel. Young Martin liked to play baseball, football, and basketball. He liked to ride his bicycle and to sing. He often sang in his father's church. Martin center with his brother Alfred Daniel left and his sister Willie Christian right. Young Martin played in his backyard with his friends. One day he was told that two of his friends would no longer play with him because they were white and he was black. Martin cried. He didn't understand why the color of his skin should matter to anyone. Martin's mother told him that many years ago, black people were brought in chains to America and sold as slaves. She told him that long before Martin was born, the slaves had been set free. However, there were still some people who did not treat black people fairly. White only. Restaurant white only. In Atlanta, where Martin lived, and elsewhere in the United States, there were white-only signs. Black people were not allowed in some parks, pools, hotels, restaurants, and even schools. Blacks were kept out of many jobs. Martin learned to read at home before he was old enough to start school. All through his childhood, he read books about black leaders. Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, George Washington Carver. Martin was a good student. He finished high school 2 years early and was just 15 when he entered Morehouse College in Atlanta. At college, Martin decided to become a minister. After Martin was graduate from Morehouse, he studied for a doctorate at Boston University. While he was there, he met Coretta Scott. She was studying music. They fell in love and married. In 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. began his first job as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. The next year, Rosa Parks, a black woman, was arrested in Montgomery. She had been sitting just behind the white-only section on a bus. When all the seats in that section were taken, the driver told her to get up so a white man could have her seat. Rosa Parks refused. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a protest. Blacks throughout the city refused to ride the buses. Dr. King said, "There comes a time when people get tired of being kicked about. Boycott public buses. Equal rights." One night, while Dr. King was at a meeting, someone threw a bomb into his house. Martin's followers were angry. They wanted to fight. Martin told them to go home peacefully. "We must love our white brothers," he said. "We must meet hate with love." The bus protest lasted almost a year. Then it ended. There were no more white-only sections on buses. Dr. King decided to move back to Atlanta in 1960. There, he continued to lead peaceful protests against white-only waiting rooms, lunch counters, and restaurants. He led many marches for freedom. "We march for jobs for all now. End segregated rules in public schools. We demand an end to bias now. We march for jobs for all at decent pay now. We demand voting rights now. We demand decent housing now." In 1963, Dr. King led the biggest march of all, the March on Washington. More than 200,000 black and white people followed him. "I have a dream," he said in his speech. "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they would not be judged by the color of their skin but by the content of their character." The next year, in 1964, Dr. King was awarded one of the greatest honors any person can win, the Nobel Peace Prize. The country was changing. New laws were passed. Blacks could go to the same schools as whites. They could go to the same stores, restaurants, and hotels. White-only signs were against the law. Dr. King told his followers to protest peacefully, but there were some riots and some violence. Then, in April 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee. He planned to march so black and white garbage workers would get the same pay for the same work. On April 4th, in Memphis, Dr. King stood outside his motel room. Another man, James Earl Ray, was hiding nearby. He pointed a rifle at Dr. King. He fired the gun. An hour later, Dr. King was dead. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of a world free of hate, prejudice, and violence. Carved on the stone which marks his grave are the words, "I'm free at last." Ralph Martin Luther King Jr., 1929 to 1968. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. Important dates: 1929, born on January 15th in Atlanta, Georgia. 1947, ordained a minister. 1953, married Coretta Scott in Marion, Alabama. 1955 to 1956, led boycott of Montgomery, Alabama buses. 1963, led the March on Washington on August 28th and gave his "I Have a Dream" speech from the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. 1964, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. 1968, assassinated on April 4th in Memphis, Tennessee. 1983, the third Monday in January was declared an annual federal holiday by the United States Congress to honor the life and ideals of Martin Luther King Jr. The end.